Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Earth defense ship Titan, watching the stars change color as massive alien vessels appeared in Earth's solar system. The ships were unlike anything humans had ever seen before, with smooth surfaces that seemed to bend light around them in structures that defied all known physics. Some ships looked like giant crystals floating in space, while others resembled living creatures with wings that moved slowly through the vacuum. Jake had been waiting for this moment his entire military career. Earth scientists had detected alien signals for decades, but this was the first time any extraterrestrial civilization had made direct contact. The approaching fleet consisted of 12 different ship designs, each one representing a different alien species that belonged to something called the Galactic Council. The communications officer turned to Jake with wide eyes. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission on all frequencies. They're speaking perfect English. Put it through," Jake ordered as he straightened his uniform and prepared to make history. A holographic image appeared in the center of the bridge, showing a tall, ethereal being with translucent skin and eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. The alien spoke in a voice that sounded like wind chimes mixed with distant thunder. "Greetings, humans of Earth. I am High Counselor Zephyr of the Galactic Council. We have observed your species for many decades and have come to offer you a choice that will determine the fate of your world." Jake stepped forward, trying to keep his voice steady. "This is Admiral Jake Morrison of the Earth Defense Force. We welcome this historic contact between our species." The alien's expression remained neutral as it continued. "Admiral Morrison, we appreciate your courtesy, but time is short. The Galactic Council represents 12 advanced civilizations that have maintained peace and order in this galaxy for over 3,000 years. We have come to warn you of an ancient enemy that approaches your solar system." Another hologram appeared, showing a dark cloud of moving shadows that seemed to consume everything it touched. Stars disappeared as the darkness passed over them, leaving nothing but empty space behind. "This is the Void Swarm," Zephyr explained. "It is a force of pure destruction that feeds on matter itself. For 3 centuries, the Council has been retreating from this enemy, abandoning entire star systems to its hunger. The swarm will reach Earth in approximately 6 months." Jake felt his blood run cold but kept his expression calm. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Evacuation," Zephyr said simply. "Our ships can transport your entire population to safe worlds far from the swarm's path. You have 48 hours to prepare for departure." The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. Jake looked at his crew and saw the same mixture of fear and determination in their eyes that he felt in his own heart. "You're asking us to abandon our home," Jake said slowly. "We are offering you life," replied another voice as a second hologram appeared. This one showed a mechanical being with glowing red sensors for eyes. "I am Logic Prime of the Mech Collective. Our calculations indicate 0 probability of successful resistance against the Void Swarm. Evacuation is the only logical choice." Ambassador Lisa Carter had been standing quietly in the corner of the bridge during the exchange. As Earth's chief diplomatic officer, she had trained for first contact scenarios, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. She stepped forward with the grace and confidence that had made her successful in international negotiations. "Honored Council members," Lisa began, "humanity appreciates your warning and your offer of assistance. However, we need more information before we can make such a momentous decision. Can you tell us more about this Void Swarm and why it cannot be defeated?" Zephyr's expression showed what might have been sadness. "Ambassador Carter, the Swarm is not a conventional enemy. It learns from every encounter and adapts to any weapon used against it. Energy weapons become useless within hours. Kinetic projectiles are absorbed and converted into more swarm creatures. Even our most advanced technologies have proven inadequate," Logic Prime added clinical details. "The swarm's adaptive capabilities exceed our ability to develop countermeasures. In 300 years of conflict, we have never achieved a decisive victory. Tactical retreat remains the only viable strategy." Captain Ryan Blake, who had been listening intently from his position at the tactical station, raised his hand. If I may ask, how many worlds has the Council abandoned to this enemy? The question seemed to surprise both aliens. Zephyr hesitated before answering. Over 4,000 inhabited systems have been evacuated. The populations were relocated to safer regions of the galaxy. And how many times have you actually engaged the swarm in direct combat? Ryan pressed. Direct engagement is inadvisable, Logic Prime responded. Our simulations consistently show defeat as the most probable outcome. Ryan exchanged glances with Jake. Both men had spent their careers studying military history and strategy. They knew that battles were not won by simulations alone. Lisa continued the diplomatic dialogue. We understand the gravity of the situation. However, abandoning Earth would mean leaving behind everything that makes us human. Our history, our culture, our very identity is tied to this world. Better to preserve your species than your sentiment, Zephyr said. The choice is yours, but choose quickly. The swarm does not wait for anyone. Jake made a decision that would echo through history. We need time to consult with our world leaders. Can you give us the full 48 hours? Of course, Zephyr. Agreed. We will remain in orbit until you are ready to depart. But remember, Admiral Morrison, that pride has been the downfall of many species. The Council has survived for millennia because we know when to retreat. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Jake looked out at the alien fleet hanging in space like a collection of impossible dreams made real. In less than 2 days, humanity would have to make the hardest choice in its history. Ryan, get me a secure channel to Earth Command, Jake ordered. Lisa, prepare a full briefing for the President. And someone wake up every scientist, astronomer, and military strategist on the planet. We have work to do. The bridge erupted into activity as humanity began to grapple with a decision that would define their future among the stars. President Helen Tucker sat at the head of the emergency conference table in the White House Situation Room, surrounded by the most powerful leaders on Earth. The holographic displays showed the alien fleet orbiting above while secure. Video feeds connected her to presidents, prime ministers, and military commanders from every nation. Ladies and gentlemen, Helen began, we face the most important decision in human history. The Galactic Council has given us 48 hours to evacuate Earth or face destruction by something called the Void Swarm. Defense Secretary Bill Harrison leaned forward with concern etched on his weathered face. Madam President, our initial analysis suggests the Council is telling the truth. Their technology is centuries ahead of ours, and if they say this enemy is unstoppable, we should take them seriously. I agree, said Chancellor Maria Santos, joining from Germany. My advisors believe evacuation is our only realistic option. We cannot risk the extinction of humanity based on pride. Similar voices of agreement echoed from leaders around the world. The logic seemed inescapable. An advanced alien civilization that had survived for thousands of years was offering to save humanity from certain death. Only a fool would refuse such an offer, but Dr. Carl Peterson raised his hand from where he sat near the back of the room. As Earth's leading expert on xenobiology, he had been studying the data transmitted by the Council ships with growing unease. Madam President, I respectfully disagree with the consensus, Carl said as he stood up. I've been analyzing the Council's information about the Void Swarm, and I found several disturbing patterns. Helen gestured for him to continue. What kind of patterns, Doctor? Carl activated a holographic display showing the swarm's path of destruction over the past 3 centuries. The Council claims the swarm is unstoppable, but their own data suggests otherwise. Look at the timeline of their retreat. The display showed a steady progression of abandoned systems, creating a clear pattern across the galaxy. The swarm isn't just randomly destroying worlds. It's following the Council's retreat. Route almost exactly. More importantly, the time between each system's fall has been decreasing. General Patricia Williams, who commanded Earth's space forces, studied the data with sharp eyes. You're suggesting the swarm is getting stronger? Exactly, Carl confirmed. But not in the way you might think. The swarm isn't just consuming matter for food. It's learning from every encounter with Council forces. Each retreat gives it more information about their tactics, weapons, and strategies. Prime Minister David Chun, joining from Australia, looks skeptical. Even if that's true, Doctor, how does that change our situation? If the swarm is learning from the Council's mistakes, what makes you think we can do better? Before Carl could answer, Lieutenant Colonel Amy Richardson stepped forward. She had been quietly analyzing tactical data in the corner of the room, but now commanded everyone's attention. Because we're not the Council, Amy said firmly. Every species in their alliance has been fighting this enemy the same way for 300 years. They use energy weapons, we don't. They rely on massive ships, we use smaller ones. They retreat when things get difficult, we tend to fight harder. Helen studied the young officer carefully. Are you suggesting we can defeat an enemy that has driven the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy into retreat? I'm suggesting we can try something different, Amy replied. The Council's own data shows the swarm adapts to whatever strategies are used against it. But what if we use strategies it has never encountered before? The room erupted in heated debate. Some leaders called the idea suicide, while others saw it as humanity's best chance for survival. Through it all, Helen listened carefully, weighing every argument. Secretary Harrison shook his head. Colonel Richardson, with all due respect, you're talking about gambling the entire human race on an untested theory. So we're gambling the human race either way, Amy countered. If we evacuate, we become refugees dependent on the Council's charity. If we stay, we at least have a chance to remain free. Dr. Peterson supported Amy's position with additional data. The biological evidence suggests the swarm is essentially a living weapon that was designed to adapt to conventional tactics. But biological systems have limits. Push them beyond those limits and they can break down. What exactly are you proposing? Asked President Viktor Petrov from Russia. Amy pulled up a tactical display showing Earth's solar system. We use our 6 months to prepare defenses the swarm has never faced. Chemical weapons instead of energy beams. Biological warfare instead of kinetic strikes. Guerrilla tactics instead of conventional battles. And if you're wrong, Helen asked quietly. Amy met her gaze steadily. Then we die fighting for our home instead of living as exiles. The debate continued for hours as leaders grappled with an impossible choice. Some argued for accepting the Council's offer of evacuation, while others supported Amy's plan to stay and fight. The weight of humanity's future pressed down on everyone in the room. Finally, Helen called for order. We need to make a decision. All those in favor of evacuation, raise your hands. About half the leaders raised their hands, including several major powers. It was close, but not enough for a clear mandate. All those in favor of staying to fight. The other half raised their hands, creating a perfect split. The decision fell to Helen as the leader of the world's most powerful military force. Helen stood up and walked to the window overlooking the White House lawn. Somewhere above, the alien fleet waited for humanity's answer. The fate of Earth hung in the balance. I've made my decision, she said, turning back to face the room. We stay. The room exploded in arguments and protests, but Helen held up her hand for silence. I know this is a terrible risk. But Amy is right about one thing. If we run now, we'll never stop running. The swarm will eventually catch up with us wherever we go. She looked directly at the camera feeds connecting her to world leaders. I'm not ordering anyone to stay. Any nation that wants to accept the Council's evacuation offer is free to do so. But America will remain and fight. One by one, other leaders began to voice their support. The United Kingdom, France, Germany, Japan, India, and dozens of other nations chose to stand with America. By the end of the session, nearly every major power had committed to staying. Colonel Richardson, Helen said, you've just been promoted to General. You'll coordinate our defense preparations with Dr. Peterson's scientific team. Amy saluted crisply. Yes, ma'am. We won't let you down. Dr. Peterson, I want you to assemble the brightest minds from every field. Biology, chemistry, physics, engineering, everything. We have 6 months to figure out how to kill something that has survived for centuries. Carl nodded grimly. We'll need to think outside every box we've ever built. Helen turned to the communication officer. Get me a direct line to the Council. Ship, it's time to deliver our answer. Minutes later, High Counselor Zephyr appeared on the main screen looking expectant. "President Tucker, have you reached a decision?" Helen straightened her shoulders and spoke with quiet determination. "We have. Thank you for your generous offer of evacuation, but humanity chooses to remain and defend our home." Zephyr's expression showed what might have been surprise followed by something resembling pity. "You would risk extinction for the sake of one world?" "We would risk extinction for the sake of our freedom," Helen replied. "We appreciate your concern, but we got this." The transmission ended, leaving humanity alone, with their choice and 6 months to prove they had made the right one. The world changed overnight after humanity's decision to stay and fight. Every major city buzzed with activity as factories, retooled for military production, and research facilities worked around the clock to develop new weapons. The unity that emerged was unlike anything in human history, as former enemies became allies in the face of extinction. General Amy Richardson stood in the newly constructed War Operations Center deep beneath the Colorado mountains. Banks of computers processed data from around the world, while holographic displays showed the progress of humanity's desperate preparations. She had been given unlimited resources and authority to coordinate Earth's defense, but the weight of responsibility kept her awake most nights. "General, the lunar construction teams are ahead of schedule," reported Colonel Danny Harris as he entered the command center. Danny had been put in charge of building defensive installations throughout the solar system, and his engineers were working miracles. "How many platforms are operational?" Amy asked, studying the tactical displays. 16 battle stations around the Moon and 8 more being built near Mars. We're also installing weapon systems on every asteroid large enough to support them. Amy nodded approvingly. The defensive network was ambitious but necessary. Unlike the Council's massive ships, humans were building smaller, more maneuverable platforms that could strike quickly and retreat before the swarm could adapt. Dr. Carl Peterson joined them carrying a tablet filled with the latest research data. His team of biologists had been studying the swarm's behavioral patterns with obsessive dedication. "Amy, I think we've found something important," Carl said with barely controlled excitement. "The swarm isn't just one creature. It's a collective organism made up of billions of individual units that share information through some kind of biological network." "What does that mean for our defense?" Amy asked. "It means if we can disrupt the network, we might be able to confuse the entire swarm. My team has developed a biological weapon that targets the communication pathways between individual units." Amy felt a spark of hope. "A virus? More like a biological scrambler?" "It doesn't kill the swarm units directly, but it makes them unable to coordinate with each other. Without coordination, they should become much less effective." Meanwhile, in orbit above Earth, Captain Nick Taylor supervised the final tests of humanity's new fighter craft. The ships were small and fast, designed for hit-and-run tactics rather than the massive battles favored by the Council. Each fighter carried an experimental weapon system that combined kinetic projectiles with biological payloads. "How are the pilots adapting?" Amy asked during her daily briefing with Nick. "The better than expected," Nick replied. "Katie Morgan and her squadron have mastered the new tactics. They're thinking like guerrilla fighters instead of traditional pilots." Katie had become something of a legend among the fighter pilots. Her unconventional approach to combat had led to several breakthrough tactics that would be crucial in the coming battle. Dr. Betty Collins worked in a laboratory that had been converted from a former automobile factory. Her team of engineers and biologists were developing the most ambitious part of humanity's defense plan. Instead of trying to destroy the swarm, they were going to poison it. "The concept is simple," Betty explained to Amy during a secure video call. "The swarm consumes matter to fuel its reproduction. We're going to give it matter that makes it sick." "What kind of poison?" Amy asked. "Modified bacteria that produces toxins specifically designed to disrupt the swarm's digestive processes. When the swarm tries to consume our poison, it will effectively give itself food poisoning on a massive scale." The biological weapons were humanity's secret advantage. The Council had never used biological warfare against the swarm because their species were too different from the enemy to understand its biology. But humans had spent centuries studying and manipulating biological systems. As the months passed, humanity's preparations reached a fever pitch. Factory workers pulled double shifts to produce ammunition while scientists worked without sleep to perfect their weapons. Children practiced evacuation drills while their parents trained with improvised weapons. Major Susan Clark commanded the space-based training facilities where Earth's defenders learned to fight in zero gravity. The simulations were brutal but necessary as soldiers adapted to combat in the vacuum of space. "The key is mobility," Susan explained to a group of new recruits. "The swarm is fast, but it's also massive. We're going to be like mosquitoes attacking an elephant. Stay mobile, hit hard, and get out before it can swat you." The training emphasized speed and flexibility over raw firepower. Human ships would dart and fire their weapons and retreat before the swarm could adapt. It was a completely different approach from the Council's traditional tactics. Dr. Peterson made another breakthrough in the fourth month of preparation. His analysis of the swarm's biology revealed that it had specific feeding patterns based on the type of matter it encountered. "The swarm prioritizes certain elements over others," he explained to Amy. "It prefers complex organic compounds and rare metals. We can use this to our advantage." "How?" "We create decoy targets filled with the elements the swarm craves most. When it moves to consume them, we trigger our biological weapons." The plan was taking shape, but everyone knew it was still incredibly risky. They were betting everything on untested theories and experimental weapons. Lieutenant General Tony Miller coordinated the ground-based defenses that would protect Earth if the space battle failed. His forces had been training for urban warfare against an enemy that could appear anywhere. "Remember, the swarm units are tough, but they're not invincible," Tony told his troops. "Concentrated firepower can take them down. The key is not to let them adapt to your tactics." The soldiers carried a mix of chemical weapons, flamethrowers, and explosive devices. Every weapon was designed to be different from the energy-based systems the Council used. As the final month approached, humanity's preparations reached completion. The solar system bristled with defensive platforms while Earth's population prepared for the greatest battle in human history. Amy stood in the command center looking at the tactical displays that showed every ship, weapon, and defender in the solar system. The numbers were daunting, but she felt a quiet confidence that hadn't been there months earlier. "Are we ready?" Colonel Harris asked. Amy smiled grimly. "As ready as we can be. The swarm is about to learn that humans don't give up easily." The waiting was almost over. Soon humanity would discover if their unconventional approach could succeed, where the mighty Galactic Council had failed. The fate of Earth hung in the balance, but for the first time in months, Amy felt genuinely hopeful about their chances. "General incoming transmission from the deep space monitors," reported the communications officer. Amy's heart raced as she realized what that meant. "Put it through." The holographic display showed empty space, but the sensors told a different story. The void swarm had arrived at the edge of the solar system and was beginning its approach toward Earth. "All stations, this is General Richardson," Amy announced over the global communications network. "The enemy is here. All forces to battle stations. This is what we've been preparing for." Across the solar system, humanity's defenders took their positions as the greatest battle in human history was about to begin. The void swarm appeared on the edge of the solar system like a living nightmare made of shadow and hunger. Admiral Jake Morrison watched from the bridge of the Titan as the enemy approached, consuming asteroids and space debris in its path. The swarm moved with terrifying purpose, flowing through space like a dark river of destruction. "Sir, the outer sensor platforms are reporting massive energy readings," the communications officer announced. "The swarm is bigger than our worst estimates." Jake studied the tactical displays with growing concern. Intelligence reports had suggested the swarm would be large, but the reality was overwhelming. The enemy stretched across millions of kilometers of space, with individual units the size of skyscrapers working together like cells in a vast organism. "General Richardson, this is Admiral Morrison," Jake spoke into his secure communicator. "The swarm has entered our solar system. Estimated contact with outer defenses in 6 hours. General Amy Richardson responded immediately from the War Operations Center. Understood, Admiral. All units are to proceed with Phase 1 of the battle plan. Remember, we need to test their adaptation speed before deploying our main weapons. The first wave of human defenders consisted of conventional spacecraft armed with energy weapons and kinetic projectiles. Everyone knew these attacks would fail, but they needed to see how quickly the swarm could adapt to familiar tactics. Captain Nick Taylor led the initial assault from his command ship positioned near Jupiter. His fighters moved in perfect formation. As they approached the enemy's outer edge, the swarm's response was immediate and devastating. All fighters opened fire. Nick ordered as his ships entered weapons range. Beams of coherent energy lanced out from the human ship's striking individual swarm units with tremendous force. The attacks were successful at first, with dozens of enemy creatures destroyed in the opening moments. But the celebration was short-lived. "Captain, the swarm is adapting," reported Lieutenant Katie Morgan from her fighter. "Our energy weapons are becoming less effective." Nick watched in amazement as the swarm units began to develop resistance to the human energy weapons. Within minutes, the same attacks that had been devastating were barely causing damage. "All units withdraw to fallback positions," Nick ordered. "Phase 1 is complete." The retreat was orderly but sobering. The swarm's adaptation speed was even faster than predicted. Any conventional weapon would become useless within hours of. First used. Back on Earth, Dr. Carl Peterson monitored the battle from his laboratory while making final preparations for the biological weapons. His team had worked tirelessly to develop viruses that would target the swarm's internal systems. "The adaptation process seems to require physical contact with destroyed units," Carl observed as he studied the sensor data. "The swarm is actually consuming its own dead to gain genetic information." This observation would prove crucial to humanity's strategy. If the swarm needed to consume its fallen members to adapt, then disrupting that process might prevent them from developing immunity to new weapons. General Amy Richardson watched the tactical displays with intense concentration. Phase 1 had confirmed their theories about the swarm's adaptation abilities. Now it was time to test their unconventional weapons. "Colonel Harris, deploy the biological weapons," Amy ordered. "All units are cleared for Phase 2. The second wave of human attacks was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Instead of energy weapons or kinetic projectiles, the defenders used biological warfare on a massive scale. Specially designed viruses were delivered by fast-moving drones that could penetrate the swarm's defenses. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Swarm units began dying in huge numbers as the viruses attacked their digestive systems. The biological weapons were completely unfamiliar to the enemy, and its adaptation mechanisms couldn't respond quickly enough. "Direct hit on the primary cluster," reported Major Susan Clark from her battle station near Mars. "We're seeing massive casualties in the enemy formation." For several hours, it seemed like humanity's strategy was working perfectly. The swarm continued to die as the biological weapons spread through its ranks, but then the inevitable happened. "General, the swarm is beginning to adapt," Dr. Peterson announced with concern. "They're developing immunity to our viruses." Amy had expected this, but she had hoped for more time. The swarm's learning ability was truly extraordinary. Even biological weapons that should have been completely alien to it were being countered within hours. "All units prepare for Phase 3, Amy ordered. "It's time to get creative." "Lieutenant." General Tony Miller had been studying the swarm's behavior from his position commanding the defensive platforms. Something about the enemy's adaptation process had caught his attention. "General, I'm seeing something interesting," Tony reported. "When the swarm adapts to our biological weapons, it has to cannibalize large numbers of its own units. This creates temporary weak points in their formation." Amy realized the implications immediately. "You're saying the adaptation process makes them vulnerable?" "Exactly. If we can time our attacks to coincide with their adaptation cycles, we might be able to exploit those weaknesses." This insight led to a new tactical approach. Instead of trying to prevent the swarm from adapting human forces, would attack during the adaptation process when the enemy was temporarily disorganized. Captain Katie Morgan led a daring raid deep into the swarm's formation during one of these vulnerable moments. Her fighters carried nuclear devices that were designed to detonate when the enemy was consuming its own dead. "All fighters follow me in," Katie ordered as her squadron dove into the heart of the enemy formation. "We've got a 30-second window before they finish adapting." The raid was a spectacular success. The nuclear explosions occurred just as the swarm was in the middle of its adaptation process, disrupting the entire procedure. Without the ability to properly adapt, the enemy formation began to collapse. "Incredible," Dr. Peterson exclaimed as he watched the sensor readings. "The disruption is cascading through their entire network. They're losing coordination, but the victory was costly." Katie's squadron suffered heavy losses as they fought their way out of the swarm's formation. Many brave pilots sacrificed themselves. To ensure the mission's success, the battle raged for days as human forces continued to exploit the swarm's weaknesses. Each attack was timed to coincide with the enemy's adaptation cycles, creating a rhythm of destruction that the swarm couldn't counter. Admiral Morrison coordinated the space-based defenses while General Richardson managed the overall strategy. The human forces were taking heavy losses, but they were inflicting even greater damage on the enemy. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the outer system," the communications officer reported. "It's from a council ship." Jake was surprised. "Put it through." High Counselor Zephyr appeared on the main screen looking shocked and confused. "Admiral Morrison, what is happening?" "Our sensors show the swarm is being destroyed." "We're fighting for our home," Jake replied simply. "Just like we said we would. But this is impossible. The swarm cannot be defeated. We have tried for centuries." "Maybe you were trying the wrong way," Jake suggested. "Sometimes the best strategy is the one your enemy doesn't expect." The transmission ended as Jake returned his attention to the battle. The swarm was wounded but not defeated. The final phase of the battle would determine whether humanity's gamble would pay. OFF Dr. Betty Collins had been monitoring the enemy's biological systems throughout the battle. Her analysis revealed something that would change everything. "General, I've found their command structure," Betty announced excitedly. "The swarm has specialized units that coordinate the others. If we can target those units, we might be able to break their entire formation." Amy felt a surge of hope. "Can you identify the command units?" "They're the largest structures in the formation. They emit different energy signatures than the regular units." "All forces, this is General Richardson," Amy announced over the communications network. "We've identified the enemy's command structure. Prepare for the final assault." The stage was set for the decisive battle that would determine the fate of Earth and possibly the entire galaxy. Humanity had proven that the swarm could be hurt, but the ultimate test was still to come. The final battle for Earth began with the largest coordinated assault in human history. Every ship, weapon, and defender in the solar system focused on a single objective: destroying the swarm's command structure. General Amy Richardson stood in the War Operations Center, watching as humanity's fate hung in the balance. "All units, this is General Richardson," Amy announced over the global communications network. "This is our moment. Every sacrifice, every preparation has led to this. We end this now." The assault force consisted of over 3,000 ships ranging from massive battle cruisers to small fighter craft. Leading the charge was Admiral Jake Morrison aboard the Titan, while Captain Nick Taylor coordinated the fighter squadrons from his command ship. Dr. Carl Peterson had identified 17 primary command nodes within the swarm's formation. These massive structures served as the brain of the enemy collective, controlling the actions of billions of individual units. If they could be destroyed, the swarm would lose its coordination and collapse. "Remember, the timing is everything," Amy reminded her commanders. "We need to hit all 17 nodes simultaneously. If even one survives, it might be able to coordinate a counterattack." The plan required perfect coordination across millions of kilometers of space. Human forces would have to strike at precisely the right moment while avoiding the swarm's desperate attempts to protect its command structure. Captain Katie Morgan led the most dangerous part of the mission. Her fighter squadron would penetrate deep into the swarm's formation to plant nuclear devices on the central command nodes. It was essentially a suicide mission, but Katie had volunteered without hesitation. All fighters, check your equipment, Katie ordered as her squadron approached the enemy formation. We're going to fly through the heart of hell and plant our gifts. Stay close and watch each other's backs. The fighters dove into the swarm like arrows shot into a dark storm. Enemy units swarmed around them, trying to intercept the human craft before they could reach their targets. The battle was fierce and chaotic, with explosions lighting up the darkness of space. "Target acquired," reported Lieutenant Steve Parker as his fighter approached one of the command nodes. "Preparing to deploy nuclear device." One by one, the fighters reached their targets and deployed their weapons. Many pilots were killed in the process, but their sacrifice was not in vain. The nuclear devices were planted exactly where they needed to be. Meanwhile, the main battle fleet engaged the swarm's defensive forces in a massive space battle. Admiral Morrison commanded the assault from the Titan's bridge as human ships fought desperately to keep the enemy distracted. "All batteries concentrate fire on the outer perimeter," Jake ordered. "We need to keep them busy while our fighters complete their mission." The space battle was unlike anything in human history. Massive explosions lit up the void as ships on both sides were destroyed in the fierce combat. The swarm's individual units were tough and deadly, but human tactics and determination began to tell. Dr. Betty Collins monitored the battle from her laboratory on Earth, providing real-time analysis of the swarm's behavior. Her expertise in biological systems had been crucial to understanding the enemy's weaknesses. "General, the swarm is trying to protect its command nodes," Betty reported. "They're pulling units away from other areas to reinforce the defenses." Amy saw the opportunity immediately. "All reserve forces attack the weakened sections. Don't let them regroup." The human forces pressed their advantage as the swarm's formation began to show signs of strain. The enemy's attempt to protect its command structure was creating gaps in its defenses that human ships could exploit. Lieutenant General Tony Miller coordinated the final phase of the assault from his command post on the moon. His forces had been held in reserve for this crucial moment. "All units prepare for simultaneous detonation," Tony announced. "We have confirmation that all nuclear devices are in position." The moment of truth had arrived. 17 nuclear weapons were about to detonate simultaneously in the heart of the swarm's command structure. If the plan worked, the enemy would be crippled. If it failed, humanity would face certain extinction. Detonation in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Tony counted down. The explosions were visible from Earth as 17 miniature suns blazed to life in the darkness of space. The nuclear devices detonated with perfect timing, sending shockwaves through the swarm's formation. The effect was immediate and devastating. The command nodes were vaporized in the nuclear fire, breaking the communication links that held the swarm. Together, without coordination, the billions of individual units began to act independently. "It's working," Dr. Peterson exclaimed as he watched the sensor readings. "The swarm is fragmenting. They're losing cohesion." What followed was a cascade of destruction unlike anything ever seen. The swarm units began attacking each other as their communication network collapsed. Without central coordination, they reverted to basic survival instincts, turning on anything that moved. "All units maintain defensive positions," Amy ordered. "Let them destroy each other." The battle continued for 3 more days as the swarm tore itself apart. Human forces provided occasional assistance, but mostly watched in amazement as their enemy self-destructed. The ancient terror that had driven the Galactic Council into retreat was consuming itself. Admiral Morrison stood on the Titan's bridge watching the final moments of the battle. Scattered groups of swarm units were still fighting, but they posed no real threat to Earth. The coordinated terror that had plagued the galaxy for centuries had been reduced to mindless fragments. "Sir, we're receiving multiple transmissions from the outer system," the communications officer reported. "Council, Ships are approaching our position. Jake smiled as he realized what this meant. The Galactic Council had returned expecting to find an empty solar system consumed by the Void Swarm. Instead, they were discovering that humanity had achieved the impossible. High Counselor Zephyr appeared on the main screen looking stunned beyond belief. Behind the alien leader, Jake could see other council members from different species, all wearing expressions of shock and amazement. Admiral Morrison, this cannot be real, Zephyr said in a voice filled with wonder. Our sensors show that the swarm has been destroyed. How is this possible? We told you we had this handled, Jake replied with quiet satisfaction. Humanity doesn't give up easily. The council ships moved cautiously through the debris field that had once been the mighty Void Swarm. Their sensors confirmed what seemed impossible: the ancient enemy was truly defeated. Logic Prime of the Mech Collective joined the transmission, his red sensors flickering with rapid calculations. Admiral, our analysis indicates a success probability of less than 0.01%. How did you achieve victory where we failed for 3 centuries? We tried something different, Jake explained. Instead of fighting the swarm the way it expected, we used tactics it had never encountered before. Ambassador Lisa Carter joined the conversation from her position on Earth. As humanity's chief diplomat, she would handle the formal negotiations with the Council, but she wanted to make one thing clear. Honored Council members, Lisa began, humanity appreciates your earlier offer of assistance. We understand you were trying to help us survive, but we chose to fight because we believe some things are worth dying for. General Amy Richardson added her perspective from the War Operations Center. The swarm was powerful, but it had a weakness. It could only adapt to tactics it had seen before. We gave it something completely new. Dr. Carl Peterson provided the scientific explanation. During a follow-up briefing with Council researchers, biological warfare was the key. The swarm had never faced an enemy that understood biological systems the way humans do. Our weapons targeted its internal processes in ways it couldn't counter. The Council members listened with growing amazement as humanity explained their victory. The tactics that had saved Earth were indeed revolutionary, combining biological warfare with guerrilla tactics and precise timing. But how did you know to target the command nodes? Asked Zephyr. Dr. Betty Collins answered from her laboratory. We studied your data and realized the swarm was actually a collective organism. Destroying the command structure broke the entire network. Captain Katie Morgan had survived her dangerous mission and was recovering in a medical facility. When asked about her role in the victory, she gave a typical human response. We did what we had to do. Earth is our home, and we weren't going to let anyone take it from us. The Council spent weeks studying the aftermath of the battle, trying to understand how humanity had succeeded where they had failed. Their scientists were particularly interested in the biological weapons that had proven so effective. We request permission to study your biological warfare techniques, Logic Prime announced during one of the formal meetings. This knowledge could help us defend against similar threats in the future. President Helen Tucker considered the request carefully before responding. We're willing to share our knowledge, but only as equals. Humanity won't be treated as junior partners in this relationship. The negotiations that followed established humanity as a full member of the Galactic Council, with all the rights and responsibilities that came with that status. Earth would contribute its unique perspective and tactical innovations to the Council's collective defense. Admiral Morrison was promoted